A lot of what we're going to cover would apply to people of any gender, but there is an interest. We were specifically invited to speak on the topic of engaging women through life changes. Apparently that was a topic that was requested from previous delegates. So we are going to focus on women, but increasingly a lot of the things that are anchor points in a female lifestyle, female life cycle, such as parenting, caring for adult dependents and so on, things that crop up, are equally shared across people who live in all sorts of partnerships and solo and care, whatever their gender. So I just wanted to put that context up there up front. I'm Jennifer Liston-Smith, and I'm Director and Head of Coaching and Consultancy with My Family Care. And you'll find myself, my colleagues Angela Stalker and Caroline Renstam in particular, in the exhibition area. So if you go into the exhibition area and turn left, you'll find them towards the end there. So we're all about the combination of work and family. So it's quite a niche area, but in itself quite broad. It's about taking what can be a negative relationship or potentially a clash between work and career on the one hand, and the pull towards family in its broadest sense on the other hand. And we're about taking both of those and saying that there can be a plus rather than a versus in the middle. They don't have to conflict, they can combine. And actually, for employers and employees, if we get it right, both on a strategic level and a personal level, that individual who is successfully combining career with family can be one of the most loyal, engaged and productive people, and particularly loyal in the sense of likely to stay with the organisation instead of moving on elsewhere. So that's what we're about. And we're privileged to work with a lot of the city institutions, financial services, legal and professional services, and other organisations in sort of science, technology, engineering, and broader sectors. Within those organisations, we do a lot of work with individuals. Some of that is on the coaching and consultancy side, a lot of individual coaching, workshops, seminars for parents' networks, family networks, and so on. But equally, we work with line managers, looking at best practice, both online and offline tools. And we work with a lot of HR and diversity leaders, upskilling internally, transferring knowledge. And we provide, as well as the coaching side, we provide a lot of solutions around care, specifically backup care when care solutions fall over, as they will for most individuals around 9 times in a year. They need backup care on a day they could work and would work if they had that solution in place. So backup care and also ongoing care solutions. So a range of provisions and a range of different people within the organisation that we work with, but all about that little nutshell of work and family working together. Now, before we start thinking about the critical points in a female life cycle, or anybody's life cycle, but with particular focus on women, let's look at a little bit of context. There are a few things we need to kind of give a nod to in order to understand the context. One of the things that's happened in recent years is there's been a lot of focus on, if you like, fixing the individual, fixing the woman. Wonderful book by Sheryl Sandberg, for example, Lean In, which is all about asking for more. But actually there are bigger contexts. There are systemic and organisational factors that probably need looking at. How are people gauged in terms of their gravitas, their performance, their readiness for seniority? Are there stereotypes inherent in that are not just about fixing the individual, but more about fixing the system? And therefore we've had many learned papers and a lot of practical experience over a decade saying, well, actually there are organisational factors. We had Sylvia Ann Hewlett writing in the Harvard Business Review back in 2005, talking about the myth of the executive woman and having it all. Sylvia Ann Hewlett talked about on-ramps for women, but also off-ramps, those leaky points in the pipeline where women fall out of the workplace because it's not sustainable to have both, to have it all. We also had, as recently as the last couple of years, we had Anne-Marie Slaughter, real groundbreaking article about women can still not have it all, and a lot of discussion about that. So there's a lot of recognition that it can be challenging for both women and men to combine work and family. and a lot of focus on the individual, though rightly a recognition that there are some systemic factors as well. Equally important to say, not all women have children, of course. So if you're talking about the female life cycle, many women and men, of course, are childless by choice, so it's not all about parenting. But for many it is. For about 80% of the workforce, male or female, there will be parenting along the way. But equally, parenting is becoming a little bit more shared, the responsibility for parenting. We'll come back to this. But for a year and a half now, we've had shared parental leave enshrined in the legislation. And, you know, every organisation has got at least one or two cases of individuals sharing that leave, and many more where it's been really promoted and enabled. But of course, other ways of having a family exist. Many people have very different family makeups, solo parents, obviously same-sex parents who can equally share leave, obviously. But equally, there are many blended families now, families coming together with sort of second and third waves of children. So the complexity of talking about the life cycle is necessary to understand. It's not just that people go through certain fixed points in certain decades of their lives. A lot of things repeat or happen in different ways. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw this from our comms team. They said to me, it's between a rock and a hard place. And this is depicting the sandwich generation. Many of us now, myself included, are parents. I'm parents of teenagers, but also caring for older adult dependents. So very much torn between, in a sort of negative view, or with our life enriched by the dependencies that we have among those people that turn to us, whether it's our children, whether it's older dependents, but wishing to combine that with career. And actually, when we are carers in any way, a lot of the research around, some of which I've taken part in as a coaching psychologist, some of that research shows us that people who've gone through those kind of life transitions, becoming a parent, becoming a carer, talk about a different perspective, talk about their values coming to the fore, and also, as we would expect from all the myths about multitasking, we step up in our ability to get things done, to prioritise. You know, we cut down the sort of chat that we would indulge in during a day, and we hit our priorities early in order to get away and focus on what we need to. But we still have to be smart about networking. But people become clever, they become smart. So these transitions are not necessarily a negative. They're not something we should necessarily see as a detraction from career or from performance. They can actually enhance how people experience themselves and their work. Another part of the context, the retirement age is kind of disappearing into the ether. Many of us are going to be working longer, and that's, you know, fantastic, but many of us will also want to work more flexibly as we transition towards a different way of combining work and life, towards the end of what would have been our kind of working career, towards the traditional retirement age. Many people look for different ways of providing those services to the workplace. Plus, many people are, as we've mentioned earlier, caring for relatives, especially with everybody living longer. There's more likely to be dependencies. So when we're talking about supporting women, as we are, and engaging women through the life cycle, these factors count, as they do in a man's life too. But some of the data that we have suggests they still disproportionately fall upon women. So they are things to be aware of. And also in the mix, I don't know if you're aware of this too, but many grandparents are increasingly looked to for childcare, especially with the kind of costs of the childcare industry itself. Many grandparents are part of the blend of childcare solutions in any given family, if the family's lucky enough to have grandparents nearby, of course. And many people, as we said before, through blended families are taking on care in later life too. So there are many different needs represented across the life cycle. And if we want to keep people long enough to kind of get a clock at the end of their many decades of work with us, then we need to think about valuing and engaging people through that life cycle, recognising the developmental positives of those life changes, but also fixing the leaks in the pipeline. What are those critical points where people would fall out? And what can we do practically to make sure that those leaks are not leaking our people, our talent, out of the organisation? One of the really interesting things was back in the 1990s, Mike Cook, who was then CEO of what was then Deloitte and Touche, so a few things have moved on, but back in the 90s, Mike Cook initiated a project to track women who had left the firm. It was assumed that they had left in order to look after children. That was the kind of myth about why the firm was not getting women through to senior management level. And actually, when they tracked these women, they found that only 11% were actually full-time caring for children. The rest of the nearly 90% were working for somebody else, presumably because they'd found a better work-life balance or a better way of combining their requirements about life, about what life should look like, with a satisfying career. So what can we do? Well, there are 3 areas in our experience that we need to turn to, and these very much interweave and overlap, but one of the areas that's for sure really important is, we said at the outset that maybe there's been an overemphasis on what the individual needs to do for themselves, but actually there is a great deal that we can do to support an individual developmentally and emotionally as they go through different life stages. And for yourselves, thinking about how this applies to your organisation, one of the key things, which also overlaps with the other areas, but one of the key things is to allow individuals to find role models, to find networks within the organisation, to gain sponsors, people who will advocate for them, especially, thank you, especially, is that better? We'll roll with it. It sounds like you could probably hear me at the back. So microphone on, not, what's the people's choice? Microphone, thank you. Okay. So if you can create networks, if you can help people find sponsors and champions within the organisation, especially if people are working differently, maybe taking a break out from work in order to obviously have children, the transition to parenthood, or have a particularly intensive period of caring, or whatever it may be. People need advocates, they need role models, they need champions. So there's a difference between sponsors and champions on the one hand, who are senior influential people who can speak for that individual and find opportunities for them to progress. And on the other hand, role models, buddies, peer mentors, who are just people, not just really important, but people who can share experience. So maybe one of the things to think about is, how can I, in my organisation, create networks? How can I shine a light on role models? And by the way, a tip about positive role models. We sometimes find, we might help an organisation very often set up, say, a panel event talking about making flexible working work. And it's really important to think about who's sitting on that panel. Firstly, make sure it's not all mums, it's not all dads, it's not all parents. If you can find somebody who's flexing around writing a book or running a triathlon or studying for an MBA, great, because these ways of working that we're talking about work best when they are for everybody and they're not special privileges for certain groups. But equally, if the people on your panel of speakers about how to make it work, if they're all kind of incredibly high-achieving, sort of stratospheric role models, then a lot of people won't be able to relate to them. So it's best to have ordinary people who are kind of making their way in their career, getting things done, struggling a bit, prepared to talk about the warts and all, but actually talking about, well, this is how I work. Making public the role models, making public the under-the-radar flexible working, because many flexible working arrangements are informal, and people just don't know what's possible to them. So you've got a new dad or a new mum in the organisation wondering, can I possibly work 4 days a week here and still expect to get promoted? Well, the only way I really will believe that is if I've seen other people doing that. So emotionally and developmentally, what can I provide in my organisation that helps that individual have confidence and know how to progress? But equally, there needs to be, and we'll look a little bit more at this in a moment, there needs to be evidence in the culture and practical tools to help all of this actually keep the show on the road. So from an emotional developmental point of view, we talked about individuals having confidence, seeing that it's possible through role models. A lot of times we hear about people not being kind of pushy enough about their own professional brand. Do people in your organisation have enough confidence about what they bring to the workplace that they can themselves keep their career on track through life transitions? We often work with people about, what's your elevator pitch for yourself? How would you sum up in a few words your past achievements in the organisation, your qualities and strengths as an individual? And even, and research shows there's quite a lot in this third category, even what you've got better at since becoming a parent or a carer. As we mentioned before, those multitasking, different perspective elements. So creating places where people can take permission to work a little bit differently or just keep their career on track. People will often return from, say, becoming a parent, taking several months out of the workplace, and be sidelined. Often sidelined with the best of intentions. Oh, well, you won't want to be involved with that project that's got the late teleconferences with New York now that you've got other responsibilities. I'll put Sarah on that, don't worry. Actually, maybe that was the one thing that was really going to pave the way for my next promotion. And it's been taken away with, the best intentions. But actually, I wasn't consulted on that. And at that moment, I need the confidence to say, well, as I'm the person in the team with, 3 years experience of developing that project, and I've got the key skills to pull out the reports and so on, I'd love to remain involved. Let's talk about how I can remain involved. So on an individual level, how do we help people take permission? How do we create that by the role models and sponsors, but also just giving people those networks where they see what others are doing and what their big picture vision could look like, not just tomorrow. One of the other things that people often do is we think about work-life balance just on a daily basis, and we find ourselves failing. But what does it look like over the course of a lifespan? Which leads us in a way to the cultural side. What messages are we getting in the organisation? We hear a lot about the gig economy, where people sell their services on a project-by-project basis. And in a way, turnover is inevitable. But actually, the cost of your talent going to your competitors remains a huge concern for most organisations. So culturally, what messages are we giving out about wanting to retain people, wanting to keep people through those different lifestyle stages? On two levels in particular, we've heard about already today 97% of leaders being bought into the idea of health promotion and well-being in the workplace. So how are those messages coming out? Are there role models in senior levels? Are there organisational policies and practices around, for example, the organisations that have promoted shared parental leave very strongly have had huge kudos in return from people really promoting the organisation and saying, I can't believe that the organisation enabled me to work in this way by, enhancing shared parental pay or just looking at my workload and making sure that my career stayed on track. So culturally, the messages, but also line managers. And this is something you can do for yourselves to ensure that line managers have at least a simple checklist of what to cover. When somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to be a mum, I'm going to be a dad, or we're adopting, and you are faced with that moment, maybe the first thing out of your mouth is going to be, oh, not another in my team, or, something really lamentable and regrettable. And actually, how do you provide managers with enough confidence and enough kind of sense of this is easy, this is to be expected, this is just part of managing, that they will say, great, well, let's talk about this. Let's take some key details and understand about your dates. Congratulations, you must be very excited. And take a few details and then say, let's have another meeting to talk this through in about a week. And then they go off and they look at their checklist and they say, these are all the things that we should cover. And part of it is about the length of leave and how engaged that person wants to stay during leave, use of keeping in touch days and so on. But equally, how do we make sure that we keep your career on track when you return? What are the things that you want to stay in touch with, and so on. So giving managers simple tools so that when that conversation arises or somebody's saying, oh, you know, my elderly mum has had a fall, I need to be there for her, I don't know how to handle this without giving up my work. How do you, again, by use of a checklist potentially, or by use of networks and best practice sessions where managers get together, just normalise that and think about, well, you know, let's think about your current workload, what's on your plate, could that be done remotely potentially while you go off to Nottingham to, you know, sort out what's needed for a few days. So giving managers the flexibility, the preparedness, the normality for when things crop up can be a huge, huge contribution to that. On a practical level, it can be anything from the technology that enables people to work remotely and flexibly. A lot of people that we know who work in the city, who are perhaps parents, mums and dads, will go from the office, if they're working in a central office workplace, at bedtime or bath time for their children, go and be mum or dad, you know, try not to feverishly be checking their phone every couple of minutes for email while they're reading Winnie the Pooh or whatever. And then they will log on later if their role requires that, or the time zones they're working in, or their seniority. And they're perfectly happy to do that because that's the way that you integrate work and life in many roles. But do we have the practical technology to allow that in the organisation? Do we have the practices around communicating who is where and when? Have we sat down as teams and made our own best practice guidelines for how we work as a team? Who's got what going on that they need to attend to, and how can we enable that? Oh, I know you need to go to your MBA class on a Wednesday evening. I'd like to pop off on a Friday afternoon for my mum's appointments occasionally. How do we make that work? How do we keep in touch? How do we have a smooth handover? So practical things, which also can obviously include care solutions, information, just quick, ready, easy access to information, whether that's online information or, again, workshops for networks, getting speakers in to talk about everything from safety on the internet to talking with teenagers to resilience and mindfulness for carers, a whole host of topics going on in parents' networks and family networks in organisations that create that focus, that normalise it, and give people a really practical set of skills and knowledge. This is some research by somebody called Joy Bussell, who I supported this research back in 2008, and some colleagues of mine. We often hear about women's career running in spirals or running in a different format from the sort of traditional career trajectory. And actually one of the things that Joy Bussell identified from a study of professional women who are working mothers was that there's often a period of kind of sustaining, when women come back from maternity leave, a period of sustaining the almost a denial of work-life balance needs. And then around 9 to 12 months following return, a very clear and recognised moment at which people are asking, is the game worth the candle? Can I do this? Can I sustain this ongoing? And at which point, if we haven't as organisations somehow responded to that and given people tools, given people role models and a bit of a sense of the culture wanting them to stay on board, then they may disappear. Many will go and start their own businesses or, depart in favour of organisations that do it differently. Harvard Business Review, 50 years ago, they started admitting women to Harvard Business School, and they surveyed over 25,000 men and women graduates of Harvard Business School just recently in the last year or so. And they found, we're going to have a look at these graphs on the next couple of slides, but they basically found that men and women across the lifespan have very similar ideas of what success is. People fresh out of college are all about seniority of roles, about money, possessions, and so on. I mean, by and large, obviously people differ. But as they get more towards sort of 40s, 50s, definition of success is much more about giving back to the community, having healthy, productive children in the world, having good friends and relationships, and so on. So, it's a kind of broad brush, but that was very much how it was seen. However, The one area on which women and men did differ in this study was the expectations about childcare. So where people were having families, and the vast majority of these students, male and female, had families. And among the boomer generation women, so women of sort of 50 plus now, the expectation was 50% of the women expected that they would have the traditional responsibility, i.e. the primary responsibility for childcare. They found in reality that 72% actually were bearing that responsibility for childcare. So it was more traditional than they had expected. And that was sustained in the Generation X women, so women of the slightly younger generation, sort of 30-ish to 50-ish. Again, 50% expected to bear the brunt of that responsibility. 65% in reality found that their career was being made secondary to their partner because of childcare. And then when we come to the millennials, among millennials, 42% of women expected to bear primary responsibility in the future for childcare, whereas 2/3 of millennial men, these are guys up to 31, actually expecting a partner, male or female, I guess, to take responsibility, but not me, the primary male, to take responsibility for children. So really interesting, when we thought that shared parental leave was reflecting societal changes, there's still, these are among highly educated Harvard grads, still some quite entrenched expectations about who's holding the baby. Shared parental leave was brought in with the express drivers of enabling women to engage in the workplace and enabling care to be shared among two parents. So the legislation and society are kind of nudging forward, but not necessarily as fast as we would sometimes imagine. So I'd like to ask you to think now, having looked at all of these aspects that we need to think about in order to engage people through these different transition stages, let's just think really briefly about some individuals and what we can actually do for them in our organisation. So let's think about Liz for a moment. She's returned from having her first child. She's in a client-facing role, so demanding work, a little bit anxious about returning, sometimes a little bit unsure about leaving her baby Sam when he's a bit grouchy. Colleagues and manager have been supportive, even when childcare has broken down, which it often does in those first few weeks after return. And by the way, that's a huge tip. If you don't do anything other than inform your line managers how supportive it is if you can show a really flexible attitude in those first few weeks back. Because childcare will often break down, especially if somebody's using a nursery in the first few weeks back, all the sniffles go around and the child gets excluded from the nursery and the person doesn't know what to do. And if, as a line manager, you can just accommodate that, you can be solution-focused. Okay, how do we make this work? Knowing that it's not going to be like that for the next 5 years, 10 years, it's a phase. So Liz is being supported in that, but her biggest worry, we touched on this earlier, is maybe losing sight of some bigger projects because she wants to put some more boundaries around her work. So if you just turn to someone near you and say, what in your organisation are you already doing well for Liz? And if you run out of those things, what could you be doing for Liz? So just turn to someone near you, if you would, and say, if you have someone like Liz in your organisation, what are you already doing well? Maybe on those 3 levels, emotional, developmental, cultural, practical. Has anybody got anything that you want to feed into the whole room about what you're doing well already for Liz? Any offers? You don't have to, no pressure, but if anyone wants to.
Flexible working from home.
Fantastic. So flexible working of any kind is fantastic. Remote working from home, brilliant, very enabling. I mean, you're not expecting them to be working from home with the child crawling around their feet, but but nearer to childcare potentially, so getting a longer working day, getting an uninterrupted time to focus on some great stuff, plus a better work-life balance. Brilliant, thank you.
Something which I have found is very, very, very successful, and it's not just for Liz, it's for the all employees, are offering duvet days. So some organisations offer just one. Better employers offer up to 2 weeks duvet days.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, what days?
Duvet days.
Sorry, duvet days. Well, yeah, I mean, so duvet days, you don't have to disclose why you're not coming into the office or into work that day. It can simply be that you may just fancy a day in bed, or you may have some crisis at home. But it's a good KPI for the organisation that at the end of the year, for the year-end appraisals, you can say, well, this employee is using, 2 weeks duvet days. Is there an issue? Either does this employee has a problem at home, maybe they don't like working in the organisation anymore. It's a very, very good KPI.
Interesting. Thank you. So creative use of leave as well is a kind of broader topic there. So as well as, obviously, maternity, paternity, adoption leave, shared parental leave, ongoing parental leave, the unpaid leave that people can take across a child's years up to 18, and then sabbaticals, career breaks, or, innovative approaches to unlimited leave, unlimited holiday, which some organisations are experimenting with. So creative ways of using leave, and often finding that because of trust and performance aspirations, people don't abuse these things. And if they do, it kind of becomes evident. So fantastic. Some of the things that we have taken on board, some of these on the cultural and practical level and personal level, the technology and enablers, the networks we talked about, the care solutions, HR policies and practices. You may have the most brilliant policy, but have you made it available and known? I remember going in way, way back to one of our large fast-moving consumer goods organisations about 10 years ago. And one of the key outcomes there, we had a focus group with dads. And they said, why isn't there a page on the intranet for dads? And the HR person in the room said, well, there's something about parents. And Dad said, well, we don't perceive that's for us, because we wanted something that was specifically for dads. So that was an incredibly easy win, almost no-cost solution to make something that was targeted at a particular population that felt excluded. So sometimes it's about how you communicate things. And again, networks can really help to push that kind of comms and that info out. Manager capability, as we said, providing simple, straightforward guidance to managers. During maternity or adoption leave or shared parental leave, great use of keeping in touch days where people are encouraged to come in and work up to 10 times during maternity or adoption, up to 20 times during shared parental leave, and having some opportunities to connect with mentors, networks, champions on that day, line managers that are savvy enough to think about how to make good use of that day. But equally, many of the organisations we work with, because we provide a lot of parent transition coaching, helping the individual think about keeping professional life and personal life on track through that. And one of the key moments is to create a keeping in touch day where people come in during their leave for some focused coaching. You provide an opportunity to meet with managers during the lunchtime. I mean, this is something you can do yourselves without external support. Create an opportunity, an appointment to meet with managers, give a bit of a structure to that meeting, even provide something like a pop-up creche so you can bring your kiddies with you, but they're in another room, so you've got your working hat on, but the children are catered for because you may not have childcare in place yet. So all sorts of ways of making sure that people are staying engaged as much as they wish to, as well as being left in peace during the kind of key moments of their leave. And we hear that people are often saying that, I haven't actually had this opportunity to step back to this extent in my career until now. And it's all about the coaching that people really need is about understanding the reality of their career. It's not coaching that's kind of fuzzy and light. It's about how do I stay on track? Because actually, if I'm leaving my children behind to come to work, I'm really invested in working, and it's usually not just about the money, it's about meaningful work, it's about making a difference. So it's about giving people tools and a place to think about how they bring those two things together, and sometimes that is, on an individual level, about the confidence to define what having it all looks like for that person, and it may not quite look like the next person, but there will be some solution if these two are in place. So I'm just going to whiz through another couple of transition points, if you like. Ongoing parenthood. Again, this would be as relevant to many men. Many men are becoming much more hands-on parents these days, but it's an ongoing journey. And a lot of us in organisations are focusing on the parent transition to some extent. in many of the big finance and legal professional services firms, is becoming almost a hygiene factor to provide some support around maternity, paternity, because everybody else is. But the ongoing parenting journey, having teenagers, is very complex. They have very immediate needs. There are things that you want to be there for. So again, needs for ongoing recognition, needs for access to information, networks, advisors, key moments, choosing schools, navigating the maze in that way, role models again, coaching, sponsoring internally, mentoring internally around career. How do you have it all as an ongoing parent? And also, that just says motherhood is very, very public. We get a lot of advice about it from all corners. So in the workplace, how do we enable people to have the networks to process what works for them? But equally, coming to the later part in the lifestyle, there's often another double whammy. We talked about sandwich carers earlier. Another double whammy around later life is the combination of a sense of change in life. We don't often talk about the menopause in the workplace, but there are simple, on a practical level, there are simple things you can do about giving women control over the heating and the air conditioning, because it is a reality to have hot flushes and things like that as we go through that change in life. Not much talked about. And many women also feel at that point that we're becoming much more able to step back from the opinion of others, more leader-like in many ways, a little bit freer from some of the constraints of the sort of reproductive years where there's a lot of people-pleasing. That change in life can be a real chance to say, okay, I've kind of done that, now I'm having a new chapter and it's not about the same sorts of things. So it can be incredibly positive, a sense of new perspective and wisdom. But actually, there are certain needs I might have. It might be about lifestyle, it might be about more flexible working, and I might be integrating that with caring for elderly dependents when the whole piece around flexible working and different ways of working really comes into its own. And again, experience has shown that there's a lot of value in creating places for people to get together and develop mindfulness, develop resilience, and just really be able to talk about the phenomena that they are experiencing.